everyone, we have a jam-packed show for you today. A whole bunch of stories, a bunch of rumors as well, including a Nintendo Direct happening this week, some new information on things like Pikmin 4 Switch 2 Edition. Also, yeah, that's right. I just said Pikmin 4 Switch 2 Edition. That came out of my mouth. You know what's also going out of my mouth? A fresh rumor about themes. That's right. Actual themes coming to Switch 2 in the future. While they're not here right now, it appears they might be coming later. We also have some news coming directly from a studio with dev kits working on ports, major AAA ports for the Nintendo Switch 2, talking about the capabilities of Switch 2, the kind of games that should be relatively easy to get over, kind of dispelling some of the myths around the fact that, Switch 2 can't get all these AAA games. But beyond all of that, they also bring up the fact that they feel the Switch 2 is going to be really, really successful. We'll get into that too. Like, there's just so much to dive into, including some stuff from Oatmeal Dome and others. Look, guys, we have a full episode here. I don't want to tell you everything. We got timestamps down below. If you want to just skip to whatever stories you're interested in, you absolutely could. Otherwise, we are giving away 5 copies of Donkey Kong Bonanza. To enter, all you gotta do is go down to the pinned comment or the description. Click on the link. I wish you luck. We draw on the winners on the 15th, and let's go ahead and get into this first one that comes from Oatmeal Dome. It comes from the shareholder Q&A. And the question is, I'm concerned that the better specs of Switch 2 will lead to higher development costs. This is clearly a concern for investors, resulting in more expensive games. Again, this has been an issue in the whole industry. Furukawa, our dev teams are working to maintain our approach to creating games amidst scale and length. Let's just look at this full answer, because Furukawa, this is a concern in the whole industry about the rising dev costs, is why there's so many layoffs. Let's read this here. So, I'm concerned with the improved performance of Switch 2 will lead to higher game development costs, which in turn could result in higher software prices and ultimately a decrease in gaming population. What measures are you considering to address this? And Furukawa came out and said, a recent game development has become larger in scale and longer in duration, resulting in higher development costs. The game business has always been a high-risk business, and we recognize that rising development costs are increasing that risk. Our development teams are devising various ways to maintain our traditional approach to creating games amidst the increasing scale and length of development. We believe it is important to make the necessary investments for more efficient development. We also believe it is possible to develop game software with shorter development periods that still offer consumers a sense of novelty. We see this as one potential solution to the concern about rising development costs and software prices. We will explore it from various angles within the company. Now, Nintendo is one of those companies that personally, I'm not extremely worried about what they're going to do in the future. Nintendo is very keen on trying to make sure they have a number of different types of projects going on, where something like a massive 3D Zelda game could take many, many years. Something like a side-scrolling Kirby game doesn't take nearly as long. So Nintendo has a lot of different avenues like that already that they've been exploring for many, many years. And I think they're just going to keep expanding on that. And as Furukawa says, they're even talking about expanding even to more and more small games, things like Dragon Drive, Welcome Tour, and others. You're going to see a lot more games like that coming out in between all of the major releases, like, hey, a major Mario Kart game or a major Donkey Kong game or Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, right? Yes, it's going to take longer and longer to make some of those bigger games, but if they could fill in the gaps with a bunch of smaller titles, I think that is a smart approach for Nintendo. And some other studios have been following suit as well. Obviously, EA is a major publisher. We have a major game that came out today, like NCAA football, Madden next month, and others. But here's the thing, there's some smaller titles come out, including things like It Takes Two, made by a smaller development studio at Hazelight, who just keeps making bangers and releasing them at a fairly consistent pace. I would like to see more companies invest in projects like that. We recently had Ubisoft do that Prince of Persia game last year. They ended up closing that studio, sadly, but that game was excellent, and now there's another smaller Prince of Persia project coming. So I'd like to see more and more investments in these smaller projects, and hopefully with reasonable expectations on the returns on those projects. Now, let's go ahead and get into this next one, because there was a Q&A done by WCCF Tech in regards to Virtuous. Virtuous has been one of the massive port studios for Switch. They already have Switch 2 units. They're already technically, we know, working on ports of Metal Gear Solid Delta, right? That remake. They've been working on ports of that for some platforms. Switch 2 is technically not confirmed to be one of those platforms yet, but they were given a big Q&A in regards to Switch 2, and this is something we need to pay attention to, because unlike trying to do outside stuff like Digital Foundry does, examining final products, or unlike the opinions of gamers across the space or journalists or people like me, reality is Virtuous actually works with the hardware. So what they have to say about Switch 2 hardware bears far more weight than any of us on the outside looking in. So as you see here, Switch 2 Q&A with Virtuous, I think we will see it surpass the predecessor. They think this thing is going to be a very, very successful platform. Scroll down, it talks about the Switch 2 sold over 3.5 million units in its first 4 days, made it the fastest selling console ever in that time frame. Were you expecting this level of success? And they go on to say they were kind of expecting it to be pretty successful. Fastest selling console launch of all time. I don't think anyone fully predicted this level of success. It was predicted by some analysts out there, but this is where we have to go and get into some interesting stuff. So you talk about the eShop improvements and DLSS and VRR, how they're happy to be there, but they dive actually into some specifics here. And this is the question that really got people going. In terms of raw console performance, do you agree that Switch 2 is closer to the Xbox Series S than it is to the PlayStation 4, making it easier for developers to port their current gen games to hardware? So Eoin from obviously Virtuous said, GPU-wise, the Switch 2 performs slightly below the Series S. This difference is more noticeable in handheld mode. However, the Series S does not support technologies like DLSS, which the Switch 2 does. This makes the GPU capabilities of the two consoles comparable overall. Now, CPU-wise, there is a clearer distinction between the two consoles. The Switch 2 is closer to the PlayStation 4 in this respect, having a CPU that's just a bit more powerful than the PlayStation 4. So it is a more powerful CPU, but not Series S level. Since most games tend to be more GPU bound than CPU bound when well optimized, the impact of this difference largely depends on the specific game and its target frame rate. Any game shipping at 60 FPS on Series S should easily port to Switch 2. Likewise, a 30 FPS Series S game that's GPU bound should also port well. Games that have complex physics, animations, or other CPU-intensive elements might incur additional challenges in reaching 30 or 60 FPS and or require extra optimization during porting. So he's not going to sit here and say, hey, every game on the planet can just fit on this thing, but a huge chunk, a vast majority of the AAA space can. That's kind of what this is coming out here. There's going to be very specific cases where games are actually more CPU bound, and in cases like that, say like Anno 1800 or something, maybe it's just not possible to run on this platform. But it talks about DLSS as well. DLSS is an important feature and a little bit of ray tracing. So one of the most discussed hardware features ahead of launch is the support of DLSS super resolution, currently the gold standard when it comes to upscaling technology. However, not many Switch 2 launch games are taking advantage of it. Why do you think that's the case, and would you recommend that developers use it? So Eoin says, I think there are two main factors influencing whether DLSS is used in launch titles. The first being, is it even necessary? For games like Mario Kart World or the upcoming Donkey Kong Bonanza, which feature stylized cartoon-like aesthetics, DLSS may not be needed. Mario Kart, for instance, was in development for many years with the original Switch in mind. Games like these aren't trying to push graphic fidelity. They have different goals for their art content to tend to hit 60 FPS without relying on DLSS. For third-party games, it's worth noting, Cyberpunk 2077 has shipped with DLSS. Compared with the Xbox Series S and PlayStation 4 versions, DLSS evidently offers better upscaling technology, making a strong case for developers to implement it. More importantly, there are also other games that could benefit from DLSS, but don't currently utilize it. That often comes down to the fact that these titles are how they're being ported. It is not as simple as taking the PC DirectX implementation of DLSS and running it on Switch. Instead, DLSS has to be integrated through NVIDIA's MVN2 graphics API, and extra work required for this might not have been deferred by some developers for their initial ports. So in other words, yeah, look, people should use it, but also it does require extra work, and if the budget's not there, the time's not there, it's understandable. In the case of Nintendo, maybe their games don't necessarily need it to look really good on the system. I kind of think Donkey Kong might be using DLSS, but we'll know that for sure once it comes out. Just based on what I've seen of the footage, I could tell some certain areas that look like it's using DLSS, but again, not confirmed. Now, what about ray tracing? Ray tracing is something advertised by NVIDIA, especially for Switch 2. So what about that? Well, Switch 2 supports hardware-accelerated ray tracing, but barely any games are using it. Does it even make sense? Or should hardware resources be focused elsewhere? So Eoin comes in here again and says, hardware ray tracing is a widely discussed feature in this generation of consoles. The Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 support it for lighting, but maintaining stable frame rates can be challenging. Epic's Lumen offers support for software-level ray tracing on the GPU as a lighter option for lighting solution. Although with Unreal Engine 5.6, focus is shifting towards further optimization of hardware ray tracing capabilities. On the Series S, hardware ray tracing for lighting has not been widely pursued as an option. That is noteworthy as the Switch 2 has less ray tracing power than the Series S, and DLSS may not significantly close that gap. Beyond lighting, however, hardware ray tracing continues to be widely used across all platforms for reflections and shadows. This is where I see the most potential for Switch 2, as it has sufficient power to deliver high-quality shadows and reflections at reasonable resolutions and frame rates. So, in other words, what they're kind of saying with ray tracing is, look, don't expect a lot of the ray traced lighting stuff to happen, but, any sort of reflections, any sort of shadows, there definitely is enough going on with ray tracing to see massive increases there. We'll obviously have to wait to see that all bear fruit because nothing's really using ray tracing just yet on the system, but maybe that's because they're trying more traditional lighting routes and they're like, oh, it's not really functioning the way we want. But if you focus it on two key areas, as Virtuous suggests there, maybe you could get some actual work out of that ray tracing stuff, even if it's not full-blown ray tracing like we see on the high-end PC space. Now, we have to go and get into this next thing because we're not done with tech stuff yet. I figured we'll have this big tech section here because it looks like the Switch 2 does support variable refresh rate in docked mode. Not that we are not surprised that that's possible, but it's just turned off. And here's how we know, thanks to a report that's floating out here from The Verge. So we confirmed Nintendo's Switch 2 TV dock supports variable refresh rate, so why doesn't it work with Switch 2? So they basically took the dock, they used USB-C extension cables, plugged it into PC handhelds. That's what this article goes over, and these PC handhelds were able to run variable refresh rate through the dock. So the dock is not limiting the ability to output variable refresh rate. It does support variable refresh rate within the dock, but the Switch 2 clearly has it turned off internally on the system when in dock mode. So again, this is something that could be addressed with the firmware update, but just turning it on, there's a reason Nintendo has it turned off. We talked about handshaking problems in the past. You might go, well, don't the handshaking problems exist with these handheld PCs? Well, they might not be handshaking DisplayPort 1.4 to all the way over to HDMI 2.1. They might not be actually doing that, or they are doing that and they just have it turned on, and any glitches or any issues with variable refresh rate they just don't care about because, again, these are PCs and glitches and stuff like that sometimes just happens, and a lot of docks aren't really outputting variable refresh rate anyways. They hook up to these PCs. So look, I'm just going to sit back and say, yeah, obviously the dock supports variable refresh rate, so there's no hardware level restriction here. It is something Nintendo will likely add over time once they work out all the kinks of the handshaking between DisplayPort 1.4, which is what they're doing over USB-C, into HDMI 2.1. By the way, DisplayPort 1.4 does support variable refresh rate. So does HDMI 2.1. It's just a handshaking issue about converting the signal. I'm assuming it will get solved at some point, or at least be remedied to a point that Nintendo will at least give us the option to turn on variable refresh rate in docked mode, or the ability to turn it off if we don't like some of the flickering or other issues that have been known to come up in testing outside of the Switch 2 platform. We obviously don't know specifically what issues are happening on Switch 2 in docked mode to have this turned off. Now, we have other news we need to get into now that we're kind of done with the tech side of things. How about the fact that Nintendo a month ago leaked some NSO stuff, and a lot of us just didn't see it because it was blurred out in the background. This is all over Reddit right now. Nintendo might have accidentally leaked Smash 64 is coming to NSO, but not just that. This literally comes from, this is Nintendo's trailer right here. And look, I'm not good at discerning the stuff in the background. We'll show a few images from these tweets. Also, some other people pointed out they could see Glover, Forsaken 64, and Donkey Kong 64. Not sure why they include Glover of all things in the background of a promo like this. But still, someone else suggests that Scars might be there too. But at the very least, Smash 64 and Glover are pretty easily identifiable. And again, someone apparently might have found Rayman 2, The Great Escape amongst them. We'll put images and links and all this stuff down below. We'll put a link to this Reddit thread and then images of all this up. You guys are already seeing those images. It's pretty fascinating, of course, that Nintendo would have all this stuff in the background of a promotional video. But hey, you know what? Leaks come from lots of various areas, including one now that we need to talk about as we get into the rumor section of today's video. Man, we have a lot to get into. So you guys might have heard of Nash Weedle. We have covered him in the past several times. He keeps getting things right, especially with Switch 2 and a whole bunch of stuff this year. He's had so many things come true. It's hard to even list them all. I know my friend of the channel, Andres Restart, has been following it very closely and realized, man, he just keeps getting a lot right lately. So we've been paying attention. And he put out a tweet. We have a few more things, but he put out this tweet that says, "So this week." And what is he talking about? Well, this seems to be a direct reference to a potential Nintendo Direct happening this week. We've had rumors about it this month. He seems to be hinting at this week. Now, it's notable that, not every insider in the world is necessarily in agreement. One other really notable insider you guys know, and Nate the Hate here, has put out in his replies here that, that you kind of get in here, they can do whatever they want, whenever they choose. They're talking about a Direct. His prediction was by the end of September for whenever we would see Silk Song, but he doesn't know. But this is where you get I've not heard of one being this week asking about a Direct. New to Direct this week, I have not heard of anything. A chance of a Direct this week, I have not heard of anything, and one being this week at this time. So he's just repeating himself that he hasn't heard about a Direct being it this week. However, in this response, you'll note that he hasn't heard, and so he has to be this week because next week is Donkey Kong, and the week after is Pokemon Presents. They wouldn't do it the last week of July, and he says they can do whenever they choose. So they're just saying, hey, does it really matter if DK is coming out? Of course they could do it then. Does it matter what the Pokemon Presents? No, of course not. They can kind of do whatever they want. And to be fair, they did reveal or the Switch 2 the same week as Donkey Kong Country Returns HD came out. So there's evidence to suggest they could just do it whenever they want. Nathan Hate's also not saying that it won't be this week. He's literally just saying at this time he hasn't heard of it. Now, even if he had, maybe he's choosing to hold back because he doesn't have permission from his sources to talk about it. But whatever the case might be, he's saying he hasn't heard there's going to be one this week. He's not saying there won't be one. And Nash Weedle seems to be hinting at this week. And then obviously we have the other stuff floating out there for there being one at all this month. Now, Nash Weedle's not done. He actually had some stuff to go out there. First one here, it had been rumored, but I didn't mention it until now, and I can put a check on it. Nintendo Switch 2 will have new themes. This was posted today. I believe, yes, today. We'll have new themes for the menu, but it seems they won't arrive this year. So Nintendo is planning, apparently, according to Nash Weedle, to give people themes. And this should make people really excited because a lot of people have been wanting themes. A lot of people have been looking forward to this idea of having themes in their system, even if they don't change a lot of the base UI, at least customizable themes where we get to put on Zelda or Mario or Pikmin or Kirby or Fire Emblem or third-party stuff, whatever, even different colors, would enable people to add a bit more of their own personality onto their system. Again, I am in the past on record stating that I don't really give two hoots about themes. I mean, if they're there, I'll use them, but I just don't really care. I don't even change the desktop on my background. It's literally the Windows default background that just rotates between their image gallery. So yeah, I am not someone that cares a whole lot about this, but I do have the background customized a little bit on my phone. I change that customization like once every 10 years. So lets you know how much I really care about it. That being said, I'm excited if this does happen because that does mean then everyone out there that's been wanting this is going to be very thrilled. So again, not necessarily a big deal for me, but we're still going to cover stuff like this because I know it's a really big deal for a huge chunk of my audience. And again, it is a rumor out there. It is from Nash Weedle. The same person said there's a Direct this week. If there's a Direct this week, maybe that makes you feel more faith in this. I don't know. He's also not done because he has this out there as well. Heads up, Pikmin 4 will be one of the next games to receive an upgrade on Switch 2. I've heard a rumor that it will be a Switch 2 edition, which would include some additional stuff, obviously, but I haven't been able to verify this. Usually, for a lot of the Switch 2 editions, outside of the Zelda ones, even the Zelda ones, there technically was extra content, but all the other ones had like DLC level content. It would be cool to get some Pikmin 4 DLC. So that's obviously really exciting. And that sort of concludes our rumor section of today's video. Some really big stuff in there. I hope you guys are excited about that. Let me know your comments on those rumors down there. We have a few more stories here. Now, we heard about all the layoffs at Microsoft, and it's been very unfortunate, and there's been a lot of industry reactions. But what's really weird is while this is going on, apparently they might be greenlighting a Banjo Kazooie game soon. So pictures are being listened to. Xbox and Rare are reportedly interested in making a new Banjo Kazooie game. And this was originally said on the Video Game Chronicles podcast. And here's the quote from Andy Robinson. It says, and I heard more recently that pitches are being listened to. I heard constantly the name that comes up is Toys for Bob, who really want to do one. This is about Banjo Kazooie. Funnily enough, I've heard Moon Studios as well. Another one that's really interested. There's always talks about interest in a cartoon or a movie as well. So again, Moon Studios are the Ori developers. Now, obviously Toys for Bob is an independent studio and not necessarily worried about layoffs at Microsoft, although cancellations of projects they might have with Microsoft could affect them. But yeah, apparently there's pitches going around for a Banjo-Kazooie game. I don't know if this is supposed to be like a light at the end of the tunnel situation. There's no real light for losing job and maybe Microsoft leaning more into generative AI and whatever's going on. There's not really a positive way to spin that. Other than, I guess, the idea that just because layoffs are happening doesn't mean new projects can't get greenlit. So we'll have to wait and see what happened. Speaking of new projects, obviously everyone wants to know what the hell Nintendo's doing with movies and TV shows. We know about the next Mario movie. We know the Zelda movie coming, but is that all we're going to get to Mario and Zelda? Well, Nintendo is experimenting on new movie projects other than Mario and Zelda. This again comes from their, I was about to say their investors meeting. Actually, there's their annual meeting of shareholders. And then here's what Furukawa had to say about movies and future stuff. So we released a Super Mario Bros. Movie in theaters in April 2023 and are pleased to say it has been received positively by many people around the world. Looking ahead, we plan to release a new animated film based on the new Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. That is, in April of 2026, and a live-action movie for The Legend of Zelda in May of 2027. Under our strategy of expanding the number of people who have access to Nintendo IP to continuously invigorate our core integrated hardware-software business, we have been working on initiatives beyond our dedicated video game platforms for several years. Visual content is one such area, and rather than simply licensing our IP to film production companies, we are taking a proactive approach where Nintendo itself is deeply involved in the production and makes investments as needed. This approach allows us to maintain a strong commitment to the quality of the final product. Although we cannot discuss our plans beyond the Legend of Zelda movie at this time, we are working on various other projects. So, in other words, Mario, Zelda, yeah, there's going to be more. Nintendo's got more and more projects in the works, and that's always exciting. Now, what might not be exciting for some people is, well, the scarcity of Switch 2. It has indeed been hard to get in several countries. Not all countries. Japan's been nearly impossible. The United States, only select areas has it been kind of easy to get one. Most of the United States, it's actually very hard to get a Switch 2. Some areas of Canada, it's hard to get one. Certain areas in Norway and other places are having problems, but some countries have no issues, right? There's just more stock than there is demand. Well, looks like analysts are predicting for the areas that are having a hard time keeping stock right now, which is like US, Japan, and a few select territories. Yeah, they think that's going to keep going on all the way to spring. So this comes from Nikkei Asia. Nintendo Switch 2 likely to remain scarce until next spring, says analysts. And we don't have the ability to read the story, but you can kind of get the gist of what the analysts are going at here. They're basically saying, hey, the demand, they just think that it's so massive that, yeah, it's going to take until spring of next year before you can just readily walk into a store anytime you want and easily find a Switch 2. Not that there won't be minor sellouts here and there, you know, new game launches and stuff like that. But in general, kind of like it is today, it's not that hard to walk into a store and just buy a Switch if you want one. Then we're going to say that that's going to be happening soon for Switch 2, soon as in spring of next year. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, for Nintendo, that's great news. That means they're selling a lot of systems. For consumers that don't want to sit here and just, I don't want to say fight against scalpers. Scalpers are actually not having a lot of success with this because the restocks are frequent enough that scalpers are not able to really sell their units. But I do have to say that this does fall in line with a lot of people hoping to just walk into a store willy-nilly. Hey, I finally saved up enough money. Now I want to walk in and buy one, and I can't. I get it. Follow accounts like Jake Randall on X. He will definitely help you out with restocks of Nintendo Switch 2. That being said, folks, I am Nathaniel Roboljans from Nintendo Prime. Let me know what you think about all these stories down below. And as always, I'll catch you in the next video.